I'll start. Okay, greetings everyone. Hi, my name is Peter Jonas, and I'm substituting for Crystal emceeing tonight, so I've been a fairly regular participant here, so I pretty much have the routine, but I have a few little notes just to make sure I didn't cover it. First off, welcome to the Blue Ridge Story Space, and we've been meeting here for the first Saturday of every month we've been meeting here for about the last year and for a year and a half, January of 2018. And are there any new participants here today? Okay, new attendees, new attendees. Okay, well, good. We're always happy to see new people come because every time there's always somebody new still coming. Well, first of all, for the new participants, it's basically modeled very much like the NPR Moth Story Hour. It's a little bit without the competitive edge, and it's a little bit more of a more like an open mic story space. And we've always got a theme every month. And this month, the theme that it was announced last month was a time or moment in history. Now, for those of you that may have been a little bit confused about that, our themes are pretty loose. You know, I mean, you can kind of tie into it, but you can think of a real historic event that somehow ties into a story that you had, or it could be something in your own personal history. I mean, really, it really doesn't matter. So for those of you that may have felt a little inhibited thinking that there had to be something momentous or that it was tied to this November 2nd or 3rd date or whatever, it really has nothing to do with that. It's just any time in history, anywhere, in any form that you've got a story to associate with it. So the format that we will do is that we put names in the hat, and right now we have 3 names in the hat. We usually have time to do about 10 in an evening, so we're still looking for volunteers here to put their names in, and a name will be randomly drawn out of the hat. And at that point, you have 5 to 7 minutes to tell a story. And you can sit, you can stand, you can pace, however you like. And should have a beginning, middle, and end is about the only requirement and somehow tied into the theme. Now, at the end of 5 minutes, there will be, to keep a timer, just so that we can kind of keep things moving along and make sure that, as Crystal would say, equity of voice, there will be a gentle timer, a 5-minute sound, and the charming Brandon is going to be giving you that gentle nudge. And like I say, the lovely Brandon, I didn't know his last name, the charming Brandon will be giving you a slight nudge there. And at that point, it's just something back in your mind to say, you've got 2 minutes to sort of wrap up the story and nothing else. At the end of 7 minutes, there will be a slightly more aggressive double maraca. Real aggressive there. And what that means, it doesn't mean that the hook's going to come and whisk you off the stage. It just means that at that point, 7 minutes is up and try to wrap up and come to a conclusion, and then we'll have time for the next folks there. Okay, so as I mentioned, in terms of the names in the hat, we will be circulating the hat at various times, and I will circulate it one more time before we do start because, as I mentioned, we have 3 names. We'll do 5 and then take a break at intermission. And at that point, we'll circulate the hat again, and hopefully we'll come up with our 10 for the evening. Another thing to mention is that Hari here from the Citizens Television is here to record, and it's a voluntary option. I'm being mic'd right now, and it's a cable network, and I'll give Hari a minute here just to explain exactly what the recording is all about.
Yeah, I work with Citizens Telephone Cooperative, and we have a local cable channel with 4,000 subscribers that's in Floyd, Fort Chiswell, and Newcastle. So this is actually a program. It's called Blue Ridge Story Space, and we play it 4 times a week. And so we're always really grateful for those of you who share your stories and consent to us playing them on TV, but you absolutely don't have to. I have a form here. On TV, I do edit for language and content. And I shared the files with Crystal for the YouTube, and those will be unedited.
Okay. And there is a Blue Ridge Story Space YouTube channel that has almost all the sessions that we've had going on close to 2 years is recorded there, and a lot of people, you can hear yourself or the ones that you've missed. The other thing I'd like to do is thank you to the Junebug Center here that has allowed us for the past year now to meet here. They offer this space completely free of charge. It's a community service, And one way we can support them is, of course, with their concessions. They sell popcorn, wine, beer, soda pop. And some of you have already discovered that now, and they'll be also open during the intermission as well. And if you just have a couple bucks and want to just consider them that way, there's a donation box outside the door as well. So, so please do show their support. And before we leave, we'll wrap up at the end. I will announce next month's theme, but I'm just putting that out here now because what if I forget? Somebody will say, hey, what about next month's theme? So, okay, with that, I'm going to pass the hat one more time here. There is a pen here and some extra pieces of paper. And then we'll start for the first story that we've got. Just trying to get a little encouragement now, but keep thinking about it. Lots of people come in here rehearsed, and lots of people come in here unrehearsed, and sometimes they say, something I heard triggered a story for me during this session. So, so I will give you a chance now and another chance to reconsider afterwards too. So
you owe me big time.
Okay, all right. So we've got, with the first 4 names here, we'll pick one now, and then I'll continue to circulate the hat. So we've got 4 in here now, and let's see who should we have pick. I'll have right here, front and center.
I got 2.
Oh, 2, we'll just put one back, yep.
Crystal.
Okay, Crystal, number 1. And here's the miking.
Oh, okay. And so my usual traveling companions all bailed on me, so I brought one of my younger daughters. And so anyway, I had to pick out of 3 different events in my life, which were actually tied to history. And I picked the one that kind of fell somewhere in the middle. On January 17, 1994, I usually sleep till about 6:30 in the morning. But I woke up at 4:34 actually, which was very unusual. And that was because it was very, very quiet. There were no birds, no dogs, nothing. And all of a sudden I heard this really indescribable roar. I knew what it was. So I jumped out of bed, ran down the hallway, yelled for the kids, come upstairs, earthquake. And it was the Northridge earthquake, which also happened to be my youngest son's 13th birthday. So there the clock fell off the wall at 4:38. We all stood in the tiny hallway, which was only about 8 feet long and 3 feet wide. There were 6 of us standing in that hallway. And the books, I had bookshelves all around the perimeter above the doors. All the books were coming down on us, so we were rained on by books. My ex-husband was complaining because a book fell on his foot. He didn't have anything bigger to complain about. And it was just shaking and rattling, and we were all holding on. I mean, there were about 45 seconds between me getting to the top of the stairs and yelling, get upstairs, earthquake, and we were all assembled in there. It was remarkable. But once you've been through an earthquake, you know what I'm talking about. And this was by far the biggest earthquake that I've been through. It was a 6.7. And unfortunately, 57 people lost their lives because there was, in Northridge, there was an apartment house that was built rather shoddily, and the second floor ended up on the first floor. And all the occupants of the first floor became postage stamps. And of course, the next thing was the streets were erupting with fire because the gas lines were all buried. So we had to run outside and shut off the gas, because in California you have to have a specific device right next to the gas meter in case something like this happens. So no gas, no lights, no phone, no internet at that time, and a rattling house. And of course, when you have the first earthquake, that's just the beginning. The next, the aftershock, which sounds like aftershock, not so bad, could be worse or less. But you're looking at about 100 to 150 earthquakes over the next 4 days, all tapering off a little bit. Well, so by the time it was done shaking, which was maybe a couple of minutes, it feels like an eternity, but it feels really, is it ever going to end? Is the house going to fall down? I had this ugly house that withstood every disaster. There was never for me to claim anything, you know. So, but by the time the quake was done and we kind of had gathered our senses, my boys ended up, they didn't want to be in the house, so they went and took their sleeping bags and slept under the tree, which was okay. It was not a big tree. If it fell on them, it wouldn't have hurt them. And so my older girls kept saying, Mama, don't be sad. And I said, why? They said, well, the china cabinet in the dining room is in the middle of the dining room now. And most of the dishes are on the floor, broken. I said, it's just dishes. So we swept them up and disposed of them. The worst part was I had appointments that day and I had no way to get a hold of my clients. So after I kind of tried to figure out how to make some food for my family, I hopped in my car, and I did not know that there were a lot of freeway bridges that had fallen down onto cars with people in them. And so, but I knew that that could happen. So at every bridge that I approached that I had to get under, I kind of went through there with 100 miles an hour. And on the other side, I kind of went, good. Well, I made it to all my appointments, and my clients were very happy because nothing had happened to me. And of course, I made a lot of money that day because they all felt sorry for me, which was nice, you know. But I kept my commitment, and then I came home. And for the next week, I was basically just wading through all kinds of debris. There were cabinets that had fallen over because I didn't follow the rules. See, you're supposed to tie everything to the wall. Everything has to be screwed into the walls. And I thought, nothing ever happens. Well, it did. So here I lost about, I'd say, a couple of $1,000 worth of china that I couldn't claim because there's a $15,000 deductible on earthquake damage. So I'm kind of really glad I don't have to deal with earthquakes anymore.
When this topic came up, the chances of it actually falling on this date, I found kind of odd, but my moment in time actually fell on this date. It was November the 2nd, 1990. This was the day I began my work in advocacy for the disabled. I was driving from Mount Airy, North Carolina to Forsyth Hospital in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. On this day, I was meeting with a bunch of doctors. We were determining how we were bringing my child into being born. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't know what. His chromosomes were fine, so we knew he wasn't Downs, so we didn't have to worry about that at delivery. We knew he didn't have an open spine, so we didn't have to worry about that, but everything was saying something's wrong. Something's wrong. So we had to start planning what kind of team of doctors did we want there that day. Forsyth is also a teaching college, and you sign off when you go there to allow students in there. Well, because this case was odd, they wanted more students than I was kind of comfortable with. But all of this had to be worked out. What specialist? We knew we wanted a cardiologist there. Someone specializing in the lungs, any kind of breathing problems at all. We wanted these doctors there, some of them in the delivery room, some of them really close by, because we didn't know what we were going into and what we would be facing. We were a month away from my due date, and we had to start planning this. So I walk into the place, and I'm meeting all these doctors, and we pretty much nail it down and decide, believe it or not, I allowed 12 med students in there. And so it became real crowded real quick, you know. The day came for my son to be born. It was totally a dry birth. There was not one drop of amniotic fluid. When he was born, he was a healthy looking 9 pound, 7 ounce baby boy. Big boy. Big, I mean, I'm not a little girl, so. all of my babies were 9-pound babies. So you looked at him and you saw this healthy boy and you thought, oh, he's so perfect. And he was the fat, chubby baby boy, you know. But he was also completely lifeless. He was breathing, but he was lifeless. He was limp. He had no muscle tone at all. He was just like, I'm an older generation. We got a few of y'all. Do y'all remember the Stretch Armstrong? You know, that just wobbly. I mean, there was nothing, no muscle tone to help him at all. We ended up spending a year well, they transferred us from Forsyth to Baptist. He was a year old when I brought him home the first time. He was a year old. In that time, I started picking up about, girl, you got to fight for this kid. You got to be the one that stands here and fight. You got to go up against doctors. You got to go up against society of people that have their own preconceived notions. I knew my battle was beginning. Finally, during that time, while we were at Baptist Hospital, we ended up getting a diagnosis, and it's called fetal akinesia sequence is what it is. And every one of the children born with this disease die of heart failure that first year. We happened to be in Baptist when Wesley went into heart failure. And so he was 6 months old and he went into heart failure, and they did surgery and repaired his heart at that time. All right. Well, yes, that saved him. But the problem was there was no information out there about children like this because he was the only one that lived through it. So I bring home this baby when he's a year old, and I'm like, now what do I do? What do I do with this kid? He can't sit up. He lays. How do I get help? This is not something a young mother is prepared for. She knows how to feed and burp. Well, and maybe if she don't, she can call her mom. Her mama knows, you know. There was no one for me to call. And so I started researching and working and figured out, what do I have to do with this child? How do I have to make him have a better life? And so before it was all over with, my husband and I had separated because he wanted no part of it. And I ended up moving down into the Asheboro area with my sister, and I went to live down there. And getting involved in the community, trying to get help for my son, and so he could have a good quality of life. And so I became a mentor. We started a mentor program in the Randleman Asheboro area for other parents that were bringing home these babies that had no clue and no resources, nobody to talk to. How do we do this? And sometimes it's even frustrating. And you're having to deal with your own frustration. You know, you don't want to be the angry mom, but you're angry, you're mad, you didn't end up with this perfect child, and this is really hard. And there was no one. And so we started this organization. It was mentorship. I was the only mentor for about 4 months. So I had all these moms bringing me these babies and saying, Pam, what do I do? You know, and I would connect them with resources because you don't realize a wheelchair is $10,000. Most people are trying to pay their rent. How in the name of God are they going to pay for a $10,000 wheelchair? How are they, they have these devices to help children stand or to help them sit. All of these things even Wesley needed at the time. Where's the resources coming for this? Trust me, when you have a baby and you're in Baptist Hospital for a year, your insurance is done. They've done washed their hands of you. When his bill got like something 1.6 million, they cut him off. They said no more. And okay, I'll end up going over. So I started that. Well, then one day this lady came to me that I was working with, and she said, Pam, I have someone I need you to meet, and I want you to come and speak with her and tell her about your son and y'all's life. And I said, sure. I'm always willing to talk about Wesley. Everybody knows that about me. So I drive to Raleigh, and I walk into this conference room, and they're sitting at the desk. This was 1990, just before 1992. Sat Hillary Rodham Clinton. And we all got our political views, and I get that, and I'm not going there. But she was fighting to get the school systems to allow these children in school. And getting a law passed to where the school systems had to allow that now. And she asked me my experience, because the one thing that she understood that nobody else has is that while it takes a village, there's not a village for children like this. There's not a well for me to go to. And I have dear friends sitting here that I can call and I can say, hey, Barbara, can you drop me off a gallon of milk? Hey, Peter, can you sit with Wes a minute? And Kathleen, they'll come sit with Wes a little bit. But it doesn't take long before that well runs dry, because it's every single day. I can tell you, today I need this, and today I need this. It's always something. So we took on the school system, and I fought with teachers at the school who wanted to keep the kids segregated. They didn't want to have to make allowances for them and integrate them into the school system. I finally found Floyd, which is excellent with this. Their classroom is literally in the center of the school. I ran across teachers, one school that wouldn't let these children be in the yearbook because they couldn't be photographed, because they might be, taken advantage of. They didn't realize this is not about Wesley's memories. He's never going to remember going to that school. This is about my memories, my life, my child. And I had to fight with them. I had to deal with an art teacher who said, she didn't realize I was a parent. She thought I was a volunteer. Wow. But she told me, she says, I did not go to college. This is a waste of my degree to have to deal with these children. I'll clean it all up, but I will say this. There is nothing greater in this world I have ever received than when my son took some fall leaves and glued them to a piece of paper. That was the grandest thing as a parent I ever received. When I got to Floyd County, my son went to senior prom. He's nonverbal. He has to have help constantly, but he got out there and he danced his heart out. And I have prom pictures. When he turned 21, he graduated from Floyd County High School. When he walked across that stage, his sister helped him get across the stage. That school bout came down. The screaming, the hollering and stuff. But then you run into the next problem. Then they become adults. And now what? We live in a society now where people, it takes two parents to work, and usually it takes two parents to work 2 jobs apiece to just try to get through. There is no, the mom can stay home and look after this child, or now he's a grown man. He's 29 years old, and he's as tall as I am. So who am I going to call on a daily basis to watch this child for me to work a job? So then they closed down Southwestern Training Center, where a lot of people, when they would get a certain age, would have to put their children there. And then the only other one in the state of Virginia was in Lynchburg, and they shut that one down, which is a good thing, because it was an institution where they kept them drugged and strapped down. So it wasn't a good situation. So then I came into this battle next of, you got to do something. We're getting older, and other people are having children, but they age, and what safeguards are put into place for them. And so I went again, and I went to battle with Medicaid. And I said, you've got to do something. Southwestern Training Center was $150,000 per year to have one client. So it was per client, and that was high-functioning ones, very high-functioning. They weren't my Wesley. And I said, so y'all were getting money, making money. make it so the parents can do it. And their response to me was, a parent will do it anyway. They're not going to let their child go without. And they're right. I've never bought a new car. I have never, everybody thinks I like buying houses and flipping them. I know Jim loves me. I don't enjoy buying houses and flipping them. This is what we've been able to do. We buy a ratty, rundown house, and we fix it up, and then I sell it to buy me a better house. And that's how we've been able to do it. So I went to battle with Medicaid and said, yes, I will do it, but you're condemning me to a life of poverty if you do this. So our solution finally was that I open up a sponsored residential care in my home. And right now, so y'all don't get your hopes up, Wesley will be my only client. And the state of Medicaid, the state of Virginia and Medicaid will now pay me to do what Southwestern Training Center does. And as of today, we're hoping by Tuesday or Wednesday I will have my license, and Wesley will be cared for the rest of his life, and maybe I can have a car and I can go to a dentist.
So Peter has this forlorn look. He's out in the lobby. He's trying to solicit suckers. And I said, sure. I hadn't a clue what I was going to talk about until Pam did talk. Ann's going to help me out. You're going to... I can't remember the dates, really.
October 14th.
Was when our daughter was born. But there was another little person in our life, Martha. Martha's a little older than our daughter Beth. You made me think of her. She was actually pretty much an okay delivery, but she's not an okay person. And I only wish I could laugh with you, but she stands about this tall. She's one of less than 50 with her particular syndrome. Actually, somewhere in the 20s, if memory serves. But she's almost ready to retire as a teacher of drama at a middle school in Chester County. Her whole life is one incredible something after the other. She's had more surgeries than Johnson & Johnson puts Band-Aids in a package. She's had, on her hips alone, 6 or 7 surgeries. Her thumbs are not opposed. They are rigid. But one day when we were at her place and I handed her a little notebook so she could get some information, I said, you can just keep the notebook. We were dispersing her mother's estate. She said, no, it's no problem. And I swear before I could turn around, she had entered 2 pages of information in her iPad. Essentially with 4 fingers. I can't even type. And she can do that. It's incredible. It's incredible. She rides a little electric scooter around the school, which is fine. She can do top end maybe 12 miles an hour, and she will. If you're ever up that way and you happen to take in her spring production, which is the 3rd weekend in February, and you want to help her out, don't let her drive. A small person has an accommodated, overworked car, and with her it's either stop or go. It's either left or right, and occasionally straight ahead, because she can barely reach the steering wheel. She controls the speed with the hand grip. She gets into the chair by into the car rather, by reaching into the chair, pulling out a little stool like this, climbing up on it, which is not easy, climbing into the car. Well, you need 15 minutes. But hey, don't ride with her, just watch her get in the car. She is amazing. She went to Virginia Commonwealth, and believe it or not, one of her favorite activities in college was partying. She's an amazing child. She's our only goddaughter. Well, we got a granddaughter too, but we got a goddaughter. We don't see her enough. She will say when we go to the plays, she'll introduce us when we're in the audience as incredible, as astounding as what this guy did and what this woman did. That's just a bunch of bull. She's amazing. She's amazing. She's married, and she's married to, her husband is also of lesser stature. He's about 5 feet tall. Remember now, she's not 4 feet tall. They live in an apartment that's been repurposed for her needs. The doorknobs are down here. The light switches have long, extended poles on them. You're nodding your head.
Well, sorry, I'm a nurse.
Have you attended a person
I have not, but I know what you're talking about because I've worked with some.
accommodation? So I was gonna say, gee, I could talk about October 14th when Ann just out of the clear blue sky says, remember what happened on this day? I said, no, and she said, my water broke. I said, really? I didn't even know you'd gone fishing. So I washed the car that day because I didn't know what the hell to do. Or I thought I might tell you about, we went across the line into North Carolina with my football team and we won 72-0. It was awful. We were 8th graders. We were playing middle school kids. You know, it was like, I had kids taller than me. It finally got to where I turned to my sideline and I said, anybody hadn't scored yet? It was awful. But you made me think about Martha. We had the privilege of going to the hospital and well, we didn't deliver the baby, but we delivered the baby back home. They adopted a little feller. The interesting thing is the nurse will say, are you Mr. McConnell? Says, yeah. And she puts him down on the gurney, and then you reach over and you pick him up. You don't touch. And we carried him home. But Martha sticks in our memory a lot. I got nothing.
I'm a William & Mary graduate. There isn't a single test, paper, exam, or quiz that we don't put off to the last minute and then agonize over as if it were the most momentous occasion in our life. So I take these themes really, really seriously for no particular reason. And so my immediate thought was, okay, November 2nd. And I immediately knew what I was going to talk about. Had it been yesterday, I would have talked about the day I proposed marriage to someone, because that was All Saints Day 2011. But November 2nd was the day, although I didn't know it at the time, that I got sick with swine flu exactly 10 years ago. I had been living in Blacksburg for probably a little over a year at that point. And I had gone to Virginia Tech for grad school and discovered to my chagrin that grad school and I really don't get along with each other. It's like the worst combination of going to school and having a job. Except that I went to I had the good fortune to go to grad school right after the banks collapsed in 2008, so I wasn't even getting paid. I took out student loans to go to grad school. That shows you how smart I am. I went to William & Mary and I paid to go to grad school. So I've been living in Blacksburg and trying to make ends meet. And I was stuck in the rut that I think a lot of us get stuck in, where instead of just changing our situation, we try really hard to caulk up a sinking boat while we're still in it. And I had gotten a job at Target, and I remember waking up that Monday And I'll never forget the sensation. I've never had it with any other illness. It felt exactly as if I had several long strands of hair down my throat. No matter how much I coughed, I couldn't dislodge them. And it wasn't painful. It just was very irritating and very persistent. And I remember thinking, well, this can't be me getting sick. Otherwise, there'd be, I'd be blowing my nose or have, I was coughing reflexively, more to like try to get this thing out of my throat. Within a couple of days, I had a fever. And I thought, oh, great, I caught the flu. And the strain of H1N1 that particular fall was particularly nasty. I don't know what it was. And unfortunately, after that, everything kind of becomes a blur. My fever went up to about 103.7. I was almost completely immobile during the day. When it would go down at night, sometimes I could get up and sort of move around. I guess within about 10 days, I'd been talking to my dad on the phone and emailing my parents and letting them know. And he came to pick me up and bring me back to where they lived in Buckingham. My condition was serious enough that they wanted to be able to look after me. And I'm really glad that they did, because I ended up developing pneumonia in both lungs. And I now realize how the flu used to kill people. It's not the flu that kills you, it's everything you catch after that. And before antibiotics, if you caught pneumonia in both lungs, you were pretty much done for. Unless you had the constitution of an ox and the immune system of a junkyard dog, you weren't making it through that. And I have always been predisposed to upper respiratory ailments. And luckily, my parents took me to the ER. They got me in to see a doctor. They x-rayed me, saw the pneumonia in both lungs. And after that, it was just waiting for the fever to break and waiting for the cough to go away. What was really important about that story wasn't the suffering or the pain or the mental and emotional trauma that went along with all of that. So I went back to Blacksburg, and it was as though with the fever breaking, a fog had lifted. And I said, why am I here? What am I doing in this particular plastic little university town? And it wasn't very long after that I discovered Floyd, and that was the story I told actually not a year ago today, but it was November's story of last year. And I don't normally bring my smartphone on stage with me, but if I try to quote this from memory, I'm going to get it wrong. This is the ending to one of my favorite songs by a very good friend of mine, a very talented musician named Danny Schmidt. The story goes, or the way that I was told, there was a king that always felt too high, and then he fell too low. And so he called all the wise men to the hall and begged them for a gift to end the rises and the falls. And here's the thing, they came back with a ring that was simple and plainly unbefitting of a king. Engraved in black, it had no front or back. There were words around the band that said, just know, this too shall pass.
On saying a thing, and but when I thought about a day in history and thought about my life, I thought, actually, I did get to witness a very incredible day in history, it turned out. This is apolitical, no big long point here other than I saw something very interesting, or was aware of. So I didn't rehearse this at all, so I'll just go through my little checklist. I was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps. I was a radio operator. I was in a naval communication station in the Philippines, and it was the summer, the date is a little fuzzy here, but we can look it up, in 1964. I had been in Vietnam for 3 months earlier in the year. Our job was to intercept other people's communications. So I was a Morse code operator, which is a lost art. But some of you guys, I know there's at least one other Vietnam veteran here and maybe some others. So that's an old type of communication. It was used a lot by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong low-level operations because it didn't take much power. So you could put up a little antenna and get what you needed. So to make a long story short, we were listening to other people. I had been at Phu earlier in the year, and a little thing where we had 4 basically truck containers back together, bunch of barbed wire and the Vietnamese army guarding us, and we were listening to the guys. So I went back to the Philippines after that, and so this was kind of going on. Vietnam had been in National Geographics. At the time, the big concern everybody had was South America, what was going on in South America and the potential threat there. Nobody was thinking about Vietnam. But, so one night we would work 8-hour shifts from 8 to, I guess 4, and then 4 to midnight, and midnight till 8, and the mid-watch, and kind of quiet. And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden there was a lot of talking going on. People gathered in. We see people come in that don't usually show up during the midnight shift. And there's brass, higher ranking officers and stuff, don't know what's going on. So, to make a long story short, one of my friends, Mac McFarland, who he was monitoring the naval headquarters in Hanoi of the North Vietnamese Navy. He intercepted a message from the North Vietnamese headquarters, radio message to torpedo boats that were out in the water. It's the middle of the night. The message said, "You fire at will." What was going on was we had 2 U.S. Navy destroyers, the Turner Joy and the Maddox, this was the Tonkin Gulf. And they were patrolling and also eavesdropping. And so in the middle of the night, these torpedo boats received the word to fire. So what happened was that intercepted message was flashed, as they call it, a message sent to Hawaii, to the Commander-in-Chief Pacific CINCPAC. And they said, "You're clear to open fire, defend yourselves." So in the middle of the night, the torpedo boats approached the destroyers, and with their radar-controlled guns in the middle of the night, they fired and sank the torpedo boats. That, of course, was the Tonkin Gulf incident, and led to the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which led to some of us going to Vietnam. I went back again. And so on that day in history, I got to watch the beginning of the Vietnam War.
All right. I bet y'all are getting sick of seeing me up here. When we got the subject, I was trying to think, November, beginning of November, what happened to me? Not a damn thing that I could remember. I got married at the end of November, but nothing pinpointed, and maybe I misunderstood the subject. But I started looking back and thinking about how old I was, and I've been around for a lot of history, for a lot of things that I'm sure a lot of you heard about or read about. I was born February 4th, 1944. Well, September 2nd, 1945 is when World War II ended. And I can remember my mom talking about being on a train after the war with me as a baby and it being full of troops returning from the war and how the soldiers were taking care of me for her and all that. I can remember on the front porch of my neighborhood when people used to have real front porches that held a lot of people. All the neighbors coming out and celebrating and shooting off guns and making noise. This was July 27th, 1953. The Korean War ended, or never was declared a war. And in case you don't know, there was never a truce signed for the Korean War. Both sides just agreed to quit killing each other. But there was no real armistice at the end of the Korean War. I was on my way to school. I was in the 9th grade going to a school in downtown Detroit. And kids come running out of the local sweet shop, we used to call it. I said, "Did you hear?" I said, "What?" It's February 3rd, 1959. Plane went down with Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, Richie Valens. That was these guys we were into that, but as deep as you can get. And to hear that they were all killed in a plane crash was horrifying to us. If you have ever seen a picture of what was left of that plane, it was about the size of this chair. It was terrible. The Kennedy assassination. I had gotten out of high school. This is November 22nd, 1963. And everyone's talking about this assassination. And it's like, what, who, what, where? it was surreal. The president got killed. We couldn't comprehend it. We're teenagers too. We weren't really that bright. But it's, it was just like, what's going on? People are dying. People are being killed. July 22nd, 1969, first man on the moon. I don't think anybody that was alive then can't remember that. I always wonder why it never went any farther. I mean, all right, what was going on after that? Why didn't they do more? Why isn't there a base on the moon? Why aren't we launching spacecraft from space stations so they don't have to break the pull of gravity? It all seems so easily done with our abilities, but I guess it all depends on this. And that ended. October 4th, 1970, Janis Joplin dies. Another crushing blow. We were just getting into Janis big time. Of course, we had no knowledge of the black singers like Willie Mae, Big Mama Thornton, who she emulated, to a T. July 3rd, 1971, Jim Morrison. Another one bites the dust. Between the heroin and the alcohol, things weren't going well. In fact, I did a painting called 1969 that has simulated headstones in the corner of Morrison, Joplin, Hendrix, and has Leary on there because he should be on there. April 30th, 1975, the fall of Saigon. Who can't remember those pictures of the helicopter trying to get people in off the roof of the buildings when everyone was trying to get away from the Viet Cong? I didn't go to Vietnam like Bob did back there, and it still gives me chills thinking back on it. I can't hear a Huey go over and not get the hair in the back of my neck stands up. March 28th, 1979, 3 Mile Island. Remember that, the meltdown? Scary stuff. May 18th, 1980. It's hard for me to believe this was that long ago. We're talking almost 40 years now. Mount St. Helens. It just doesn't seem like it could have been that long ago, does it? 57 people were killed. That was the damage on that. April 4th, 1983, the spaceship Challenger exploded on launch. December 17th, 1989, this is a big one, The Simpsons debuted. Hey, that's history, right? They're still at it. December 1991, the USSR collapses. January 1st, 1994. For guys like me from Detroit, this was the death knell of our city. The NAFTA agreement was signed, North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. Of course, we all had the Y2K bug fear. The Trade Center in September 11, 2001. I need to go back because I thought about this later. The Detroit riots, which I talked about before, July 23rd to July 28th, 1967. 43 people dead, 1,189 people injured, 7,200 people arrested, 2,000 buildings destroyed in 5 days. Space Shuttle Columbia, February 1st, 2003, disintegrates on re-entry, 7 dead. Hurricane Katrina, August 28th, 2005, 1,836 dead. Barack Obama, November 2008, same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states, June 26, 2015. As of April of this year, 2019, Jimmy Carter was the longest living president ever at the age of 94. That's it.
pull the chair back a little bit so I can see the people over here. So I'm gonna dispute the date that you came up with for the Challenger disaster. I think it was 86. And the reason I say that is because that's the one I'm going to talk about. And I haven't, again, I didn't even know what the theme was until I walked in and sat down and asked. So I haven't rehearsed this at all. That was, yeah, that year, that Challenger disaster, I was living in Lansing, Michigan, which is the other side of Michigan State, Lansing and East Lansing. And particularly at that time, it had a heavily politically correct lesbian community. Now at the time, we didn't call it lesbian, it was the women's community. Because it wasn't just lesbians. I had discovered that I was bisexual, although at the time I didn't say that because bisexuality was very suspect. You were actually talking to men. You actually had friends who were men. So you just didn't talk about that if you want to be, I don't know, safe in the women's community. And I was one of those people who was like, this was brand new to me, so I was just going with what I was sensing. I had, up until that point, I had been very strongly religious in terms of being born into the United Methodist Church, being part of the charismatic movement, translates sort of into Pentecostal. If you know the charismatic movement, it came out of the Roman Catholic Church, and so it didn't have all the restrictions of you got to wear a dress a certain length, you can't wear makeup, you can't dance, you can't play cards. It didn't have that sort of thing. It was much looser, but it was very Pentecostal. And for me, that translated into beautiful harmonies when we'd go into praise. Just incredible harmonies, and they just pop up out of no place. People speaking in tongues and then translations. Lots of, the term was prayer and praise, so lots of prayer, and then the next time around reports on those prayers, what had happened. I was very much, that was very much a part of my life. And when I discovered that I was bisexual, the place that I was living in, there wasn't a community, so I moved down to Lansing. And I couldn't go to any church there and be honest. So I basically divorced myself or separated myself from any religion, any Christian religion, because all the other aspects I didn't even explore. And when the Challenger disaster happened, I was desperately in need of some place to go because it really hit me hard. I suppose part of it was because Judy Resnick, I think she was the first, I can't remember. Is this the one that had the teacher on it? Yeah. Okay, so there were two women, astronauts. So when I was listening to some conversation in the women's community, one of the women said that she was a Quaker, she was a friend, and that she was going to be going to a meeting that Sunday. And I thought, well, geez, this woman is very open about who she is. If she's going to this Quaker meeting, they must be somewhat accepting of this stuff. Maybe I can go. And as strange as it is, my last name's Whittier. I'm related to John Greenleaf. I had never been to a Quaker meeting. So I didn't really know what liberal Quakerism, Hicksite Quakerism was all about. So I said to her, I said, do you think anybody's going to be talking about the Challenger disaster? And she looked at me and said, maybe. Now, if you've been to Quaker meeting, people speak out of the silence, and they speak when they get the message. And when I went, one of the women who stood and spoke had actually gone to school with Judy Resnick. So that meant a lot to me. I kind of liked what I was seeing. I kind of liked what I was hearing. I went back. I went to a couple different potlucks. And what really got me was on, I think, the third or fourth potluck, and we didn't have a meeting house at the time. We were renting a room from the Episcopal Church. So when we had potlucks, we went to people's houses. And about the third or fourth potluck, when we were all finished with the meal, all the men picked up all the dishes and went into the kitchen. And all the women went into the living room. And I thought, I can do this.
Okay. I'm going to talk about a specific day, but I feel like I need to go back prior to that day to get you to where I am on that day. So, in high school, I was kind of the odd one out because I didn't cheat. I didn't let other people cheat off of me. I like to be honest. I didn't like to get into cliques and talk about other people, and that's what high school seemed to be about, and it was really difficult for me. It was very difficult for me. And so I went through some very depressed pieces, times in my high school age. I went on to college, and every now and then it would just hit me so hard, that depression again. And it's about this time of year where it comes for a lot of people because the days get short. And it hit me one day in college, and it hit me oh so hard. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was really feeling bad. I was really feeling anxious. And I went looking for friends, and I wasn't finding my friends, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need something. I've got to do something. And I grew up in the country, and this college where I was attending was on 2 state routes. It was like just in this very small town where these 2 state routes met. And I finally realized, when I was growing up, one of the things that really helped me was just being in the country. So I started hiking out of town on this state route, which felt uncomfortable because, of course, you got all the traffic. Well, the first road I came to that turned off that state route, I was on it. I was like, I've just got to get away. And I'm walking on this road. And I'm walking on this road. I don't know where I'm going. I've never been here before. I don't know where this road goes, but I'm walking. And one of the things that struck me is that the farther I walked, it was like almost with every step I took, my burden, something about my burden was like falling off my back. Every step I took, a little bit more was falling off my back. And I kept walking, and I kept walking. And it's like, as you know, this time of year, it kind of gets dark early. And I'm like, the sun's going down over there. But but I felt so much lighter. And I felt like if I turned around and I started walking back that road, it would be like I'd be picking up all that garbage I just dropped. I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know where I was. So I just kept walking. And then I get to this place where there are like, it's like a small community and there are different roads going off. And I start going on one and I'm just like, no, this does not feel right. So I came back to, and I tried another one and I was like, okay. But by now it's starting to get like really dark. And I was like, you know, I grew up in the country and I'm walking past this woodlot and there are these hog boxes out there and there are no hogs out there in the boxes. And I'm like, well, do I climb into a hog box for the night? You know, it doesn't feel real safe just to be walking in the dark on a country road out here and I don't know anybody and who's going to come along. But I felt like something was conveyed to me that I was going to be okay. Just keep going. And this road is going to take you back out to the other state route. And I'm like, yeah, but I get on the other state route and then what? But I felt, and I don't know how to describe this, but it was like somebody was telling me, or there was something there, that there was this church I had been attending, and that somebody from that church was going to come along that state route and was going to pick me up and take me back to college. And I'm like, really? So I got to thinking back to Sunday, you know, to all the announcements. There was nothing going on at church that night. Not a darn thing. I'm like, really? I'm like, well, my load has been lightened the whole way, you know, and I feel like something has been helping me out. I'm just going to go with this. And I keep walking. I finally get out to the other state route, and I mean, it is so dark black. And I turned the direction towards college. And I have not gone more than 50 steps. And this van comes up over the hill behind me and then pulls up in front of me and stops. And I'm like, oh, the moment of truth. And I walked up and I looked in the window. And it was somebody from that church. And I got in, and he told me he had been at church. His daughter had run away, and he had gone there to pray with somebody. When he came up over that hillside and he saw this person, he was like, oh, could it be my daughter? And he took me back to school.
So this is my very first time that I've even ever been to this event. I've been trying to come for months and haven't been able to, so I'm happy to be here. And I feel inspired to share a story, so here I am. So in the late 1990s, I was living in an intentional community, and I really loved it there. I'd spent like years in this corporate job going, like there's got to be another way, like what else can I do? Like I need another life, right? And on weekends I was an environmental activist, and so I would go and like, you know, stand in front of nuke plants or whatever, and I felt like I was living this double life. So finally I got this invitation to take a job through a grant that was being offered at this community, which was also an environmental education and retreat center. So I took it. And everyone thought I was crazy because I gave up 2 weeks paid vacation, health insurance, 401k plan, a really substantial paycheck, and started living out in the woods in an off-the-grid facility for $100 a month stipend plus room and board. I have to say that was probably about one of the best decisions that I ever made in my life because it totally transformed my life. Unfortunately, the community didn't really stay together, and at one point, the owner of the land let some of us that were living on the land know that we all had to leave. And I was devastated. I was like, I finally found like home. I finally found tribe. I finally found like lifestyle that resonated and felt good to me. So I was really devastated and I didn't know what to do, and I kind of floundered around for a while. And eventually my partner and I at the time decided that we were going to buy an RV and we were going to go just travel around the country, and we were going to visit other intentional communities. We were going to visit different environmental actions that were going on. We were just going to do all of these different things and just kind of get out there and explore. So we spent a year working our butts off. I went back into corporate and really worked my butt off and made a bunch of money, and we bought this RV for cash, and we eventually got into it and we took off. And the end result was that I spent about 2.5 years traveling around the country, living in my RV and visiting different communities and what they call boondocking, living, just going down a dirt road and hanging out there for a while. And so I found myself in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And if you've ever been out to Jackson Hole, you know that it's just absolutely astounding as far as natural beauty goes. It's just amazing. And we got into town and we asked around and, like, where are some really great places to go? After you're traveling around on the road, after a while, you're like, the tourist destinations are of no interest, And so I would go to local coffee shops and I would strike up conversations with people and I would find like where some of the great things were. And one of the things that I loved to do was go to hot springs. And so someone alerted us to this hot spring that was down this 14-mile BLM road. So there I am in the RV, it's this little mini Winnie tin box, so it was shake, rattle, and roll down this road. And get to this spot, and the vista around is just all beautiful, snow-capped mountains, just gorgeous. Nothing out there. Beautiful river flowing through. Magnificent waterfall on this end, probably 40 feet high. I don't know like how wide, but just gorgeous. Probably at least the size of this room. And across the river was a hot spring. And to get to that, you had to cross a log. Or you could go about 1.5 miles down the road, which is where we parked our RV and decided to camp there. And you crossed a little bridge and you walked up the trail up to the hot spring. So that's what we ended up doing. And we get up to the hot spring and we slip in. Actually, I think we stayed overnight and then we went to the hot spring the next morning. So we're there nice and bright and early in the morning. Slip into the hot spring. Like, what else? How better could life be in this gorgeous, gorgeous place? Beautiful waterfall, hot spring, body feels so good, wonderful. And across the river, across the log, there was this parking lot. And up comes this old station wagon, and out jumps this young couple and these 2 young children. And I'm talking young, like a little, maybe 1.5, 2-year-old, and I think maybe the other one was probably about 4 or 5. And we're like, oh, are they going to really like try to come across that log with those kids? Sure enough, they did. Mom's got the little baby on her hip and we're like watching her come across the log, and like all she had to do was like fall off that log and that baby would have been swept down the river. I mean, it was like watching them come across. And they finally come across and they, slip into the hot spring, and it's that. Has anybody ever been to a hot spring like out in the wilderness? There's like this certain etiquette that happens, Like you kind of let people settle in and then you're like, so where are you from? Right? So we had that initial conversation, and then all of a sudden the guy started rambling. Like it sounded like insane rambling. And he was talking about terrorists and the World Trade Center and planes and all this stuff. And my partner and I are looking at each other like, it was just so bizarre what he was saying. It was, and he was just so like non-coherent in how he was relaying this story. And so we didn't really know quite how to respond. And the little kids running around and, you know, the whole thing. And so eventually, after he kind of went on this tirade for a while, we like sat there and we didn't really know what to say. And finally, his girlfriend or partner, mother, children, whatever, translated for him and really shared with us in a coherent way what had happened that morning. And of course, we were flabbergasted, and there was a part of us that still didn't believe that what this story was that they were telling us had happened. Of course, it was September 11th. And so eventually, after we got our fill of the hot spring, we wandered on back down to the path, and we got into our RV, and we turned on the radio and found out what was really happening. And we listened to it for about, 45 minutes, an hour. And I just felt like I just couldn't listen anymore. It's like I got all the information that I needed to get. And we were actually thinking of leaving the hot spring that day. And we decided to go ahead and stay because I kind of had this feeling of like, what's going on out there, right? We're pretty safe. We're 14 miles down a dirt road, right? So we decided to stay, but I couldn't listen anymore, whereas my partner was like glued to the radio. And I went out into the wilderness, and I sat next to the river, and I had one of the most profound days that I've ever had in nature. I got visited by beaver, I got visited by coyote, I got visited by a black bear that trundled along in the meadow right along the river's edge on the other side of the river. And I spent my day just praying and holding the space and the vision for this event to be something that catapulted the American culture into a better way of living. I don't know if that's happened, but I keep that vision and that prayer alive. Thank you.
So my story is also from September 11th, 2001, but from my perspective, it was 17 years ago. I was in second grade at Parkside Elementary School in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. It was the first year that elementary school was open, and the park next to it wasn't named yet. I remember it was this girl, Kelly's birthday, and so we had cupcakes, and we had so many extra cupcakes because every few moments on the PA system, they were like, can this person's please come to the front, your parents are here to pick you up, and the next person to the front office, your parents are here to pick you up, and half the class was gone, and we had a lot of cupcakes to eat. My parents let me take the bus home. And on the bus, it was pretty chaotic because some of the older elementary school kids were telling me like what happened and trying to explain it to me, and I did not understand whatsoever. I thought, the White House got bombed? Like, I don't know, like, I didn't get it. I thought they ran a plane into the Washington Monument because that's the only tower I had a good idea of what it was. But yeah, I went home and I learned, and my mom explained everything to me. And I remember the next 2 days later, my brother's birthday, he was crying and crying, and I felt so callous not crying like he did. I didn't fully understand, but he's like, there's people right now like still alive but dying underneath a huge pile of rubble, and I it only hit me later what that really meant. And I remember my mom after that started painting the kinds of things that her neighbors are doing, like little American flags on pieces of wood, and giving them to the neighbors, and little projects like that. And then a bigger project that our president decided to do, which invade Iraq, happened too. So I remember some of the storytellers here began told about the beginning of the Vietnam War and the end, and it's like a whole entire other war has passed us by. And I wonder if we fully digested what's going on, because I know I didn't understand what was happening at the time, and I kind of still feel like I don't fully know what's happening. But it definitely hasn't affected me in the same way that people in Iraq or people in the Middle East or Afghanistan, or if you're a Kurdish person, you might be experiencing the aftermath of 9/11 in a way that I won't understand. So I guess we recently had the second half, the end of the story. And we're living a new day in history. I don't know what to say about that, but here we are. It's a short story, but that's all I got.
This is a heavy night. Holy cow. I don't even know. I feel irreverent right now with what I'm about to talk about. But so it was the weekend after Labor Day in 2003 is the date I'm going to talk about. And that was the official first date with me and my wife now. So, and it's basically back then and still today, I rode motorcycles, but we both lived in Phoenix, Arizona. And in September, it was still really hot. I mean, you're still talking triple digits typically in September. So most motorcyclists rode at night, which seems really odd here because it's a good way to hit a deer, basically, and it's not a smart move. But my wife and I our date started earlier that day where we hiked up Squaw Peak. I think it was Camelback Mountain. It was a mountain. It was hot, but it was early, and she wore me out. And she's a little bit older than me, but you wouldn't know from that. I don't know. No, but you definitely would not have known from that hiking experience. But I felt like I impressed her somewhat just by staying up. So later that night, I came by on my motorcycle, and I had a hardtail chopper at the time, which means it has no rear suspension. It's not a very practical motorcycle at all. It doesn't have, it was a terrible death trap of a motorcycle, but it also doesn't have a rear seat. But I had a seat that would go suction cup onto the rear fender. And funny enough, 2 nights before, I picked her up. We knew each other for a long time, so it wasn't some random person I picked up at a bar. But I took her home from the bar, and she rode on that fender without the seat in a mini skirt. And I felt like the most awesome dude in the world as I'm riding down the street on this chopper with my wife's long legs up around my ears, and guys are honking at me and stuff. And I was like, I had big old lamb chop sideburns back then too, which added to the whole thing. But we decided that I was going to take her to this place called the Billet Bar in Old Town Scottsdale, which was a biker bar, but kind of a newer, it was a yuppie biker bar, basically. So it was kind of a sad place, but we got there and we're hanging out, and one of the local entertainment magazine newspaper things, like the Rhino Times in Greensboro, this was called the New Times in Phoenix at the time, stopped by, and they took our picture, and all this great stuff happened. It was our first date. It was magical at that point. And we're getting ready to leave, and Christy has to use the restroom, and I do too. And this is when I learned of something about my wife that I didn't know. One, she's really quick at using the restroom. And two, she won't wait for you after she's done. If you're standing out there, she's already gone out the door. And she's faster than me at the restroom. I thought I was pretty fast. But I go in the restroom, and I come out, and I didn't know this rule yet with my wife, and so I'm standing there waiting for her, and a girl, this dark-haired girl, comes up to me, and she's like, well, I think your girlfriend already went out. And I was like, all right, cool. So I walked out, and I get out there, and Christy's out there, and we step out, and I was like, holy cow, that's Plachette's bike. And Plachette was this crazy girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, the one prior to her that I had, who I eventually had to get a restraining order against because she was that kind of crazy. And I was like, holy cow, this Plechette's bike. And Christy said, yeah, that girl that was on the other side of the bar was your ex-girlfriend the whole time, and I didn't even notice her. I guess that's how in lust I was with my wife at the time. I didn't even notice. The girl that came up to me and said, hey, she already went outside, was my ex-girlfriend, and I didn't even realize it was her the whole time. But so we walk out, and I'm like, oh, God, that's her bike. That's crazy. But anyway, we moved on. We went back to her house where we did what young people do. I was there for a good 10 minutes or so. I was probably there longer because we talked and stuff afterward. But I left there. At this point, it's probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm riding back, and this particular motorcycle didn't have a fuel gauge on it. It had an emergency, like a little spot where once you ran out of gas, you'd flip this little lever, and it gave you a few more miles to get where you had to go, and that was basically it. So I was headed down the 101 in Arizona, and the bike starts dying, and I reach down and hit it, but I knew at that point, I was like, man, there are not any gas stations for a while, and it's very late. And I kept going and going and going, and eventually, as I'm getting to my exit, the bike dies. I'm out of gas now, and I roll to the stoplight, and the light turns, I had to stop. The light turns green, and I'm pushing the bike across the stoplight, and there's a gas station over there. The nice thing about that area is, if you need a gas station, you can see it. There aren't trees or anything. Just oh, there's the gas station over there. Whether it's a mile or 50 yards, you know where it is. You can see the bright light. So I push it across the intersection. I start walking, and this car pulls up behind me. I'm like, nah, I'm good. I can see that. No problem. And it continues to follow me slowly, off the side of the road, all the way to the gas station. And I get to the gas station, and it's the crazy ex-girlfriend. So apparently, after the billet bar, she somehow magically got her car, followed me to Christy's house, waited that 2 or 3 minutes to move on. Not 10 minutes to move on. And then at the gas station, proceeded to try to convince me that she needed to go home with me, which I didn't. I'm married for coming on 13 years now, so that didn't happen. But it was kind of a crazy story. That was followed up by another situation where she broke into my house when Christy and I were out on a date, and I came back and she was inside the house with her hair. She was a dark-haired girl, with her hair bleached the same color as Christy's hair, wearing one of my T-shirts, drinking a beer out of my refrigerator, and claiming that there was some guy named Bill there with her, who I could not find Bill, and neither could the police when they showed up, but they didn't do anything because they thought I just got caught with 2 girls at the same time. Then after that, I ended up in court, which is pretty embarrassing as a man, saying that you need an order of protection against a woman because she's crazy. But luckily, there was this very small Hispanic guy right in front of me that had the same situation going on. But that's it. That was the date in history, and it led to where we are today. So.